Good evening all and welcome. Just quick message before the video begins. I have a cold, I've waited a few days to try and make a good video without sounding like this, and I do sound better than I did the other days. So yeah, tonight I have the long-awaited video Trucker Stories. I really hope that you enjoy this one. I'm also fortunate enough to be joined by Deadly Cure on 5 of tonight's stories. So give him a huge welcome. And if you'd like to hear more from him, you'll be able to do that with the links provided at the end of the video. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. A good friend of mine told me this story a few years ago. He's the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye, but while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression, which from this guy is the equivalent of a trembling lip and a crapped-stained pant. Let me tell you the story from the first person, as he shared it with me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 a.m., and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I am on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case, and as I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking that this guy is either taking the antlers as a trophy or he's sick. As I got closer, I can still see that this guy was eating the deer, pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. He then stands up, and that's when I see it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh crap, the thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me, and by this point maybe 3 seconds have passed. I'm about to the point in the road where he's passing it. It looks at me again, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in there and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nosed Pete, the old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield, known for being tall and difficult to see around. This truck is a giant, and I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in his eyes, and it scared the bloody crap out of me. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real, when I was around 7 or 8. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standardized. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would exceed his shift, and where he was driving 24 or 36 hours or more without a break. Well, nothing than a quick bathroom break or a fast food stop. My dad had a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane, just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like, how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were doing 30 miles an hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road? He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. Well, one night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes were getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music thing up didn't seem to help. It was a rainy night on a particularly windy and windy mountain road, without a shelter to pull over safely. So he started doing these logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, "I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going at 55 miles an hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing, which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random-ass mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going at 60 miles an hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. This story usually ends with him tearing up saying, "I don't know if there are angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual." This is my father's story. He was an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s, and without a certain long-haul truck driver, I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was a 24-hour one, and my dad was the only one working the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7, when a guy comes in who just gives him the creeps. He seems sketchy. He was wearing a tight jacket and tight pants, and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer and was warm. Why on earth would he be wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of truck drivers used this station, as it was the only one open 24 hours on a very long stretch of highway. They also had a big lot, where they let the truckers park and sleep or take breaks. Well, on this night at this time, it was just my dad and a sketchy dude and one trucker who he kind of knew, as in came in frequently enough to have conversation, and asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until the sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes, while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool. The truck driver hung out with my dad a little longer until a few other guys came in to use the booths they had to eat sandwiches. I should also point out, this was pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the rural southeast of the United States in the 70s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store, and Dad did not have any protection of any kind. So the hours pass and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this guy in a car comes hauling ass into the lot, jumps out, sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a CB, nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area, and my dad's station was the first place he found. He calls 911 to report that he had walked in to a gas station 40 miles back, which was the next closest one, to find the attendant shot dead and no one else around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehended the guy in the blue car. My dad confirmed it was the sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charged him with murder and armed robbery. To the long-haul truck driver who waited around with my dad that night, thanks, and hope you're keeping it real. It's also probably worth adding that apparently the sketchy guy in the blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked at or on probation for something. He was in the system already.
I was driving a bus made out of a truck in the deserts of Central Australia. I was over 500 kilometers away from the nearest town, so yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. So I was on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal elder women to go and get their women's business health checks done. On the day I took them, we went via a place called Mintabi, so they could shop in the clothing and whatever store that's randomly in this little opal mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day, I would take them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep as they'd had a very long day, as had I, but that's my job. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep. So there's me, all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, my 30 passengers all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab, and it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance, I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road. So I dip my lights so the spotlights go off and adjust to see only what low beam will show me. I drive down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed, expecting to see the car with only one headlight any time shortly. It's nothing unusual to see a car with only one headlight out there, so I'm not even remotely bothered. As I come out of the dip, I put my spotlights and high beams back on, and there is no car, no nothing, just the empty dirt road. There is no dust in the air, and I can see a good distance in front of me and out to each side. There was nothing there, just the empty desert, the dirt road, and me alone in the cab. I keep the lights on until we come to a stop about an hour later. I didn't see any cars or anything the rest of the journey. Before I let the passengers out, I ask if any of them saw the light, and they all go dead silent. And after a short while, they start talking in their own language, hurriedly, and then they all get off the bus. A few minutes later, a couple of the ladies come up to me to ask me to tell them exactly what I saw, without leaving anything out, and to describe exactly where I saw it. Now, I'm a big guy. I've lived on 3 continents. I've been a police officer, a teacher, bus and coach driver, truck driver, all sorts of things. Let's just say I'm pretty skeptical, but I do have an open mind. I'm not scared by much in this world. After I told these ladies everything from start to finish and described in minute detail exactly where it happened, I took note of exactly how far out we were when it happened. The 2 ladies looked at me with the whites showing in their eyes. They looked spooked, and they said, and I'll never forget the way they said it, I got on great with the indigenous people of Central Australia, and I trust that I know when something rattles them. They said this, "Driver, we are so lucky that you didn't stop, because if you did, no one would have seen any of us again. We'd all be gone." I asked why, and they shook their heads and said to not talk about it, because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Min Min lights in Western Queensland. Well, whatever these ladies knew about whatever I saw in our location, they were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in the desert at night. I only ever saw this once. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies that come from this area and whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years are worried to the point of all being scared, I certainly don't want to mess with whatever it is.
I'm gonna share some stories from my days as a trucker. I've got some good ones. The first one happened when I was going on I-75 in Georgia at around 3 a.m. I see this bright light maybe 2 miles behind me. Not only is it super bright, but it's on the interstate and it's hauling ass. It's big too, and it's moving faster than anything I think I've ever seen. Now, earlier that day, I had called a guy who taught me how to drive, and he's really superstitious about life on the road. He would tell me stories of how a green apparition chased him in Florida when he was pulling too many miles, all kinds of stuff. I was really spooked from that conversation earlier, so looking into my mirror and seeing this giant light flying towards me made my whole arse clench onto the seat. This thing closes the distance between us and flies past me, probably doing 120. I had the windshield down as it went past, and I felt this massive amount of heat when it passed me. That's when I could finally tell what it was. Get this. It was a hay hauler, a truck that hauls a trailer designed for hay, and the entire load of hay in the back was on fire. I jumped on the CB and screamed, "Driver, your trailer's on fire!" The driver comes back in a surprisingly calm voice with, "I know, I'm just letting it burn off. I figure if I go fast enough I can keep my cab from getting burnt." Never figured out what happened with that one. On to story 2. I got my CDLA in 2003 and was immediately hired by a company called PAM. They pay garbage, but it was a good place to cut my teeth as a greenhorn. Once you get your CDL, the company that hires you sends you out with a driver trainer for a month to teach you the way of the road, and my trainer was a guy called Charlie. I mentioned him earlier, a really superstitious guy. Charlie was a maniac. Every 3 days, I'd have to break up a fist fight between him and another driver, and it was always over talking crap on the CB. He would snort flake too, and stay awake for a week at a time and drive non-stop. Flake is a trucker drug, a mix of speed, ephedra, and anything you can get that will make your heart rate go up, crushed and snorted. Then he would go home, fall asleep for a day or two in his chair, and crap himself. His woman didn't care, her house and bills were paid for, and she didn't need or want anything. Oh, he had no problem getting BJs from Lot Lizards either. He even offered to get me one on my birthday during the month I was out with him, at the Travel Centers of America in Roanoke. They had this all-you-can-eat steak dinner. He got me that, and was trying to get me to accept a BJ. I just said, "No man, that's not for me." Lizard being the colloquial term for a truck stop sex worker. They are honestly very low rungs on the ladder. I'm just trying to tell you how gross Charlie was. Fast forward to the end of my month as a trainee. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida at my home terminal, and I'm going to have my final test to see if I'm worthy of going first seater. That's what they call it when they let you go on your own truck. What they do is they get another driver who doesn't know you, put you in the truck with him, and he has to go through all the motions, driving, backing, and everything. One of Charlie's buddies was there. His handle was Slowhand. I can't remember his real name, and Charlie was like, "Okay, driver, you're going to get your first seat test tonight. Are you ready?" "Yep," I say. He has me disconnect the tractor from the trailer and myself. Charlie and Slowhand drive to the Applebee's. Strange, I thought I was going to get my test. "Don't worry, driver, you'll get it after this." It was at this point that Charlie and Slowhand started getting messed up. Charlie liked margaritas and he started slamming them along with Slowhand. We had a meal, and about an hour and a half goes by and these guys are smashed. We go out to the tractor and I hop in the driver's seat and Charlie goes, "Okay, here's your test. All you have to do is get me and Slowhand back to the terminal and you pass." I'm like, "Sweet. It's probably a 7-mile shot with no trailer, piece of cake." Slowhand is sitting in the passenger side and Charlie is in the back digging around in the cabinets. Slowhand starts asking me about how my month is gone and what I've been put through experience-wise. Charlie goes, "Hey, look!" and everything becomes slow motion when I see Charlie has his member out and is doing the windmill an inch from my face. I was in shock to say the least. Charlie and Slowhand thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen, and when we get back, Slowhand signed off my paperwork when we returned. It was my welcome to trucking. My third story happened around 2007. I was a trucker, and it was 2:30 in the morning in Georgia. I was in the sticks around 100 miles north of Atlanta on I-75. I was alone in a drop yard for trailers. I was there to drop off my current trailer and hook another one. All I had to do was go pick up my paperwork from the mailbox and leave. I loved stuff like this. No nonsense, load ready for me to go, no waiting around. Now, my entire life there has been this weird phenomenon that I think's followed me. You know those halogen street lights? I would say about 60 to 70% of those lights I walk under will go dark. It's the strangest thing. If I walk down the street at night, it's not strange at all if every light I walk under goes out, and when I walk away from it, they come back on. Anyway, back to Georgia. I've dropped my first trailer off, backed under the new trailer that I'm picking up, grabbed my paperwork, and I'm raising the landing gear. As I'm standing under the big streetlight, guess what? It goes out. No big deal, but I say out loud, to no one in particular, I wonder why that always happens. At that point, the craziest thing has ever happened in my life occurred. A calm voice about 3 feet away said, "Show of respect." A voice. No one was around for miles. I was in the middle of nowhere where there was no one. I heard it plain as day. It was a man's voice. It wasn't loud or scary or intimidating. It spoke in a very matter-of-fact kind of way. I freaked out, jumped in the truck, and moved 80,000 pounds faster than I ever thought I could. I'm not crazy and have no history of mental illness, or that in the family for that matter. I don't know what to tell people. All I can say is that this happened, but it has left me wrestling with this question for the longest time. What on earth does it mean?
Around 2006-ish, I was driving a flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was pre-packaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load. This was in rural Tennessee. My memory's foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee state lines. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods, on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. I found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat out did a crappy job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. I undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back, climb up on the load, and start unrolling the tarps again, and I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him, because I'm in the middle of nowhere, and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have the tarp set in place, and I'm climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working, just in case. It's an 8-pound solid metal bar, about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one end and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. So the guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as hell, like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said screw it, good enough to party. The next thing I notice were his eyes, which I can only describe as off, like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes. I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe, and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear that there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way. stops at about the driver door on my truck, and turns around, comes back to me, and repeats himself, "I've got a long walk." At this point I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that, apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him as he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around, heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck, and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and I'm climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat, just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on the phone, he's talking to his hand. And now I'm nervous, because he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. I crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face, with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, which is like 30 to 40 miles an hour on an 18-wheeler, I look in the mirror, and there's no one there.
Myself and 2 friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge, LA one night, in my Ford van. It was around 2 a.m. There was a particularly long and dark section of the highway just outside Laredo with no buildings, towns, or lights for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up on a truck and pulled out into the left lane passing me. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white face, whose arms were folded across the chest, and eyes were very closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror. I can still remember seeing the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to hitting this person. I was driving in Iowa, and a deer ran out in front of the 18-wheeler in front of me. I saw the truck swerve, then bump. Bodies do a funny thing when hit. The carcass of the deer ripped apart from the impact, but that is expected. The weird thing is the flesh and skin on the deer shredded, sending chunks flying and ripping up into the air. It slid around on the road, pieces all over beside the main chunk of body. It wasn't very bloody, just surreal. I looked in my rear view, and we drove off as you could see the blood begin to pool. It was weird there wasn't so much until 15 seconds or so after the impact. This happened to me a few years back on a random country road in Tennessee. Pitch darkness, and the only thing around were fields, hills, and me. I'm getting real tired, since the day before I just flew from Washington to Atlanta. I was driving from Atlanta to northern Indiana, and out of nowhere I see a dog, and in the grass. And normally this is fine, but its eyes weren't glowing from my headlights, which for some reason made me feel very unsettled. Next thing I know, it charged for the tire of my trailer, snarling and barking. Thank God I didn't hit it. But when I looked back, it was gone. As bad as it sounds, even if I had hit it, I probably wouldn't have stopped because I was in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. I've heard of stories of people finding some ways to get people to stop their commute in the middle of nowhere, just to rob, hurt, or even kill the driver. It was midnight, and there was no way I was going to take any chances.
A couple of years ago, I was running through the Plains states. It was about mid-afternoon. I'm hauling ass on I-80 because I gotta get something to Utah in a hurry. For anyone not versed on the interstates in the Plains state, they are very flat and very boring. While driving this very flat and very boring part of I-80, I get a whiff of burning tobacco. I hadn't smoked in over a year at this point. I had ozoned my tractor cab. I knew that smell wasn't from me or my stuff. I'm also doing nearly 80 miles an hour. One of the perks of owning your tractor is that you can turn off the speed governor. I knew I couldn't possibly have caught that smell from another vehicle. The smell just vanishes. That was weird. I let it go and try to stay alert and awake. Highway hypnosis is real. About 10 minutes later, I smell it again. Right about then, my wife starts having a mini freak out. She goes, babe? Yo, when did we pick up a Cherokee Chief? I chuckle and say, I don't have a passenger endorsement, so he's gonna have to sit in the back. He already is. Come again? There's a Cherokee Chief looking guy sitting on the top bunk. What the hell are you talking about? Just look back here for a second. To entertain her, I looked. I shouldn't have looked. There's this guy, big-ass headdress, wearing a bearded breastplate, buckskin leggings, the works. I go, what the hell? See? I think we need to stop for a bit. I'm hitting the next rest stop. I take the nearest exit, and no sooner than I do that, the quote-unquote ghost just poofs the hell out. Tobacco smell again. It was more of a, that was weird and freaky, than actually dangerous or threatening. One does not expect to get a second passenger while moving at 80 miles an hour. I also started keeping a full thermos of coffee in the cab. I want to say it was highway hypnosis, but my wife wasn't driving. There's no way it would have affected her.
I was at a truck stop in Arizona. As I was pulling through the fuel island, and right as I was about to leave, roughly 15 cop cars came flying into the parking lot with a swap van. They surrounded a truck that was already parked for the night. I later heard that the driver had lost a tire off his trailer and that it killed a guy on the side of the road. Another story I had is that the old Flying J in El Paso, I had pulled through the fuel island and was filling out logs and whatnot after filling up when someone began screaming for help on the CB. It's not unusual to hear kids messing around or whatever, but this sounded like a fully grown man and didn't sound fake. It only happened for 15 to 20 seconds, and then there was nothing but silence. Some people started asking the guy where he was, but never got a response. Suddenly, another big rig in the parking lot starts to take off, right as a few cop cars pulling to the truck parking area. The big rig takes out a smaller sign and then jumps the curve off the service road for I-10. Well, turns out the student got pissed with his instructor and stabbed him before leading the cops on a short, high-speed chase. I was heading west on I-70 here in Denver, just cruising along at around 70, when out of nowhere, I see a massive, almost solid cloud of what looks like dirt coming towards me. It was at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I scanned ahead of me, but couldn't see any vehicle it could have came from. With nowhere to go, I slowed down and took the hit, hoping there wouldn't be anything big enough in there to come through the windshield or jack up my truck. It was pretty loud as I smashed through it, and instantly I knew that I hit something that wasn't dirt. I immediately hit the washers because I couldn't see a damn thing through all of the carnage. My windshield was painted with guts. Well, it turns out it was bees. Huge bees that sounded like rocks when they were hit. I can't even imagine seeing the swarm if I was walking. They would probably kill the crap out of anything in their path. I knew this trucker down in Texas. He had just pulled him to a truck stop and decided it would be a good time to try and get some sleep. Just as he's dozing off, he hears a very loud bang. He's startled, wondering if someone is trying to shoot him or his trailer. So, cautiously, he gets up and looks around, and that's when he spots blood and guts all over his windshield and the mirror. As he looks down to survey the horror, he sees a man on the floor with a bullet hole in his chest and another man holding a gun. As you can imagine, he's quite shaken and not sure what to do next. The guy with the gun swivels his eyes and head and looks towards him, and in an amicable sort of way, smiles and goes, "Sorry about the mess, just some damn idiot trying to break into your truck," he said. Apparently shooting was allowed there. In any case, it's still something terrifying to be woken up to, but nice that a fellow trucker was out there to protect him.
I'm an owner-operator, over-the-road trucker. In my time driving cross-country, probably the freakiest encounter I had was going through Cabbage Pass in Oregon. Let me set the scene. It's dark and late in the fall of 2016. I'm coming from Florida with a load of beer headed to Portland, Oregon. It's about 2 a.m. and it's cold out. I had just left a truck stop in Utah on I-84. I can't remember the name of it, but it has a Thunderbird as its logo and is probably on or very near a reservation. My wife and I had just gotten something to eat, and we're in the driver lounge enjoying an extremely late lunch. This is a common thing in the industry. Anyway, we get done and head back to my tractor. Everything seems like any other night. We get going and get into the pass. This is where things get strange. Ahead of me in the distance is another trucker. He's not moving terribly fast. My guess was a heavy load like mine. It's starting to snow a bit. As I'm putting up the pass, I get close enough to see the company logo. It's a Prime Ink rig. In my head I'm thinking, that explains the slug pace up the mountain. As close as I can get, I can't seem to pass him. A few turns up the pass and somehow I lost sight of him. Didn't think much of it at the time. The downside is the next couple of turns, he probably hit the grade and coasted down. Whatever. I get to the Oregon side of the pass and hit the pilot down there. The wife needs the toilet and we get stopped and head inside. I didn't see any Prime trucks in the lot. I figured he just kept going until I heard a Swift driver talking. He was saying a Prime driver was trying to run him off the road. Just about that time, an older driver starts talking. About 10 years before I even got my CDL, a Prime driver went over the pass near the top, a purple-black tractor. Well, damn, I saw a purple-black Prime tractor on the pass. Coincidence? Has to be. I say as much, and the old driver gives me a look. "Did you pass him?" asked the driver, to which I said, "I couldn't." He got pale. Now I'm getting antsy. What the hell? "Okay, driver, what the hell is going on? A purple-black Prime goes over the pass. What happened? Seems he lost control when he hit black ice and went off the top of the pass. He died. People have been seeing that tractor going up the pass and not seeing it on the other side, anywhere." Now I'm officially done with this conversation and was going to leave when the driver asked me if my CB was on. Well, no, it's 2 in the morning and my wife was sleepy. It would be kind of rude. The older driver tells me that that probably saved our lives. A few weeks beforehand, a fatal accident happened on the pass at the top on black ice. After talking to a driver on the CB, that was all the provocation I needed to never go over Cabbage Pass again. A ghost trucker? No thanks. We're a hard group of people to spook, but then our lifelines become liabilities. That's unsettling. I didn't get a lot of sleep for a couple of days. This stuff just freaked me out.
I heard this story from the news a number of years ago. Well, it turns out there was this woman who had been severely depressed and planned to make her tragic end. She saw a semi parked on an off-ramp and decided to lay underneath one of its tires and wait for the driver to drive off. I can't remember how long she laid there, but as you can imagine, she was most certainly crushed to death. It took a while for someone to find her. And you know what one of the saddest parts is? The truck driver may never even have known that he inadvertently assisted in someone's suicide. It's honestly a horrible thought, but perhaps for the best, because I've heard other stories of people who have taken their lives, and when the person who inadvertently and unintentionally assisted with their suicide, they often feel incredibly bad and guilty, and it's not something that anyone should have to live with.
It was about 2 a.m. passing through rural Texas, making a heavy machinery delivery. The route I was taking to this farm was through rural Texas. You know, the type you see in movies that involve a farm in the middle of nowhere type stuff, and a house every 2 miles type deal. And little did I know, this route I was going to take was about to lead to the scariest, freakiest experience I've ever had, hands down. I have LED light bars on my truck all over the front, so when there's no oncoming traffic, I can see literally a mile. So I'm driving down the road, minding my own business, when I can see something off in the far distance with my lights. And the closer and closer I get, it looks more and more like a person. About 200 yards from what appears to be a person, I can make out that it's a girl, because of the long hair and light-colored clothes she has on. So I slow down as to not scare this girl walking in the road and turn my brights off so I don't blind her. The truck lights are bright enough as is, so I could see her just fine without it at this point. As I get closer, she turned, and when she did, my CB radio started making some slight static, and as I passed by, I swear she had absolutely no face at all. It looked like a hollow shell. I'm getting antsy just talking about this. I've never flown through gears so fast in my entire life, especially with a heavy load, and I had to be doing at least 70 before I finally came back to my senses. I called the police about it, and the worst part was, they said I'm not the first person to call this in. Through the years, they've had people call this in with similar descriptions of a girl walking down the road in the early morning hours, and when she turns, she has a hollowed out face. The sheriff and I talked, and told me about an accident that happened years back. A girl in her 20s was struck and killed by a truck speeding down that road in the early morning hours, and it dragged her so far down the road, it ground her face down to nothing. And she was described as having long hair and wearing light-colored clothes, the exact same description as I saw that night. Needless to say, I'll never be taking that route again if I have another delivery. Ever.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Yeah, this cold sucks. When I made Friday's video, I was feeling really good. And then when it came to producing Sundays, I was feeling really unwell. I was like, I'll just make it on Monday when my voice sounds better. And it just hasn't sounded better. So I knew that this video had to come out, so I'm sorry it's with the cold voice. I did try and do it over just over like a day or two to see if my voice got better, but it just hasn't. If anything, I feel like it sounds a bit worse. And now my ear's blocked and my head feels all funny. So yeah. Of course I will rest up and take it easy, but I needed to get this video out. I didn't want to let you guys down. So there you have it. I'm hoping Friday's video sounds a bit better. I'd also like to thank Deadly Cure so much for joining me today. He's a really talented creator and narrator, and I would like to, extend my heartfelt thanks towards him. You can find a link to his stuff on screen now and in the description. He really is fantastic. Alright then, guys. A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names are on screen now. You guys are amazing too. Thank you so much for the support. I'm going to wrap things up here though and give my voice a break. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.